Really appreciate you coming out. My name is Dan Schlosser, and I'm a product manager on Firebase.
Morning, everybody. My name is Sam. I'm on the Firebase team, but I was the lead engineer on the Santa Tracker app.
Awesome. So this morning, we're going to be talking about Santa Tracker and Firebase. But let me back up. As many of you may know, every year on December 24th, Santa flies on a sleigh pulled by reindeer around the world. It's a lot of work, but he delivers over 1 billion presents in just 24 hours. That's Google scale. All right. Now, as any kid would tell you, it's actually a huge pain when you don't know when Santa's going to come sliding down your chimney, right? You have to stay up, cookies and milk, the whole thing. So here at Google, we figured it's 2017. You shouldn't need to stay up all night wondering where Santa is. So now, there's an app for that. Santa Tracker is a holiday tradition here at Google. In it, kids can play holiday games, track Santa as he flies around the world. We publish a web version and an Android app, and today we're going to focus how we used Firebase to modernize it and make sure the holidays went off without a hitch. For those of you that don't know, Firebase is Google's mobile app platform with products that make it easy for you to build your app and grow a successful business. But today, we're going to be focusing on how we combined Google Analytics, crash reporting, and remote config to ensure that we could roll out this app to over 1 million users last December.
So before we jump in, let me describe our nightmare scenario. So every year, Santa Tracker rolls out to over 1 million new users. And with a user base that big, there's a lot that could go wrong. And this really keeps us up at night. So this is why we're proactive about using Firebase in the app. So before Santa flies in early November, a bunch of Googler elves meet up in an igloo in Mountain View, and we start planning the next release. We have a few goals. We need to address last year's feedback, fix any crashes that we heard about, any bugs. And we need to add a bunch of new features, games, and a fresh coat of paint to keep the app feeling new. So December 1st is the first big milestone. This is when we ship the APK out to the Play Store. And at this point, we're just biting our nails in anticipation. We're refreshing Twitter. We're looking at Google News. We want to know if there's any reaction, good or bad, to the new version of the app. But what do we do if something goes wrong? Let's say it's December 18th, and Dan's playing Penguin Swim, one of the new games, on his Nexus S running Cyanogen mod. And he gets the, unfortunately, Santa Tracker has stopped dialogue, which I'm sure we're all familiar with. Penguin Swim was supposed to be our big new feature this year, but clearly something's gone wrong. So what can we do about it? First of all, how do I even know that something's gone wrong in the app? At this point, it's because I'm just refreshing Play Store reviews, and they're not good. People are saying they hated it, or the app is stupid, or it sucks. I'd give it 0 stars if I could. Some people are even blaming us that they didn't get good presents, but I actually don't think that's my fault. And yes, these are all real reviews from this year. So we need to fix the bug. We come into the office the next morning, and we're hunting through the app for the bug. If we're lucky, we fix it that day. If it's complex, it could take longer. And then once we think we've fixed it, we have to make a new APK and start our QA process all over again. So December 20th, 2 days after the first crash, we can ship out an update to the store. Now, if Santa Tracker was a web app, we'd be done at this point. Our users would refresh, and they'd get the fix. But on Android, as many of you know, uptake can be a problem. Users have to manually accept the new version. So by the time our average user sees the working version of the Penguin Swim game, it's December 28th. And for this app, that's no good. We've totally missed the holidays. As I said, uptake is a problem for any mobile app, but it's particularly tough for Santa Tracker because this is our real user graph. So December 1st, we released the app, a few thousand downloads on the first day, very eager users. By the middle of the month, we're maybe in the low 6 figures, 100,000 new users. December 24th, when Santa's actually flying, now we've got 1 million unique users in the app. And then the next day, when Santa's landed, interest drops off, and we're back down to the low 6 figures, maybe 5 figures again. So if our app update comes out on December 28th, we didn't really fix the problem at all. None of our users saw the fix.
Right. So if we don't guard against errors like these, we might ruin the holidays for our users. Let's jump in a time machine, go back to November 1st, see if we can make some better decisions, all right? First things first, we need to know immediately if our app is crashing. Clearly, waiting for negative reviews and bad tweets is a pretty terrible way of knowing there's a problem in your app. And then once you do, just reading a bunch of screenshots of, unfortunately, Santa Tracker is stopped, gives us very few hints as to where to begin debugging. To solve this problem, let's add a crash reporting solution to Santa Tracker. If we started building Santa Tracker today, we'd recommend using Crashlytics. Back in December, we used Google Analytics for Firebase, and specifically here, Firebase Crash Reporting, which is also super free and easy to integrate. That's why we used it. Crash reporting provides the technical details we'll need to solve problems in our app and diagnose where they're happening. So let's jump into the code. Well, turns out there's actually no code to get started with crash reporting. All we need to do is add this single-line dependency to our app/build.gradle file, and crashes will be uploaded automatically to the Firebase console in around 20 minutes. So again, no code to get started, just that one dependency. So let's head to the console and see what kind of reporting we get just from that single-line dependency. All right. Here's our crash reporting dashboard. As you can see, we've had a fair number of crashes and almost 2,000 users impacted. That's no good. And we can see down at the bottom, our #1 crash is an index out of bounds exception in elf-controller.java. And it's fatal. Now, normally, this would be a bad thing, but I'm actually pretty excited about this, because at a glance, I can see what crashes are happening, which ones are impacting my users the most, so I know what to focus on. Let's drill into that #1 error, and we can see a lot more detail. We can see what kind of devices it's happening on. We can see individual crash reports if we want, or a full stack trace. Using crash reporting is much, much easier than trying to decipher a bunch of Google Play reviews. And remember, we got all of this reporting with a single line of code.
So this is pretty good, right? We're getting crash reports. It's certainly better than Play Store reviews. But we're not really much closer to actually fixing the bug. I mean, our app is still passing QA. We wouldn't have shipped it otherwise. So we need to figure out what's going on in this crash. We know when the app is crashing with Firebase, but now we need to know why the app is crashing. What specifically is happening to our real users that's not happening to our tests? So wouldn't it be great if we could basically look over the user's shoulder? We could see every screen they enter, every button they press, basically all the steps leading up to the crash. Then we'd have the best kind of bug report, which is full reproduction steps. So this is why we're going to use Google Analytics for Firebase to understand user behavior. Analytics is a free and unlimited solution built specifically for mobile. And even better in our case, it integrates automatically with Firebase crash reporting. So we're going to understand in the crash report what the user was doing before they experienced the crash. So again, this might look a little familiar. To get started with analytics, there's no code at all. You just have to add this one dependency to your build.gradle file. And now you're going to get default reporting. Well, what do I mean by default reporting? If you're an Android developer, this image on the left, you've seen it before. Maybe you've seen it in your nightmares. It's the activity lifecycle. Firebase can hook into the activity lifecycle to detect when a new activity is launched, when it stops. So you get automatic events like first app open, screen view, session start, session stop. And that's all automatic by adding that dependency. So you get a basic sense of the user's journey through your app without wiring anything up at all. So let's head back to the Firebase console with Mrs. Claus and take a look at what our crash reports look like now that we've added analytics to our app. And remember, we haven't written any custom code yet. So this is the same report as before. This is our elfcontroller.java crash that we're stuck on. And in the logs section, where we previously just had fatal, one red bubble, we've gotten 2 new events. They're both called screen view. We can see that the first one was the user going to the home screen, and the second one was the user going to the penguin swim game, and then they experienced the crash. So this is pretty good, but we probably could have guessed as much from the reviews and the crash reports. I mean, we knew the penguin swim game was crashing, and the only way to get there is to the home screen. So in our situation, this is not enough detail. And now, finally, we're going to have to write some code, because we want to get a custom understanding of what's happening in our app. So what we're going to do is log a custom event to Firebase Analytics. And this will help us understand a user's behavior. So first, we're going to get an instance of the analytics singleton object by passing a context. That context is how we hooked in to the activity lifecycle before. Now we're going to send an event name and a map of parameters. These are custom events. It can be anything you want. The name of our event is going to be tap game button, and the parameters will tell you what button the user pressed. So it's a bundle. We're going to say the button name is new game. This is when a user starts a game of Penguin Swim. So let's imagine that we've filled our app with tons of custom events like this, because analytics is totally free and unlimited, so there's really no reason not to, and we need to get more information about the crash. Now let's see what the crash reports look like enhanced with all this information. This is what we were looking for, right? This is the magical look over the user's shoulder and see exactly what they were doing. We have the same two screen view events that we had before, but we've got a bunch more now. We have click sign in button, so the user signed in before they started the game. We've got game start, game finish, and submit score. It's a pretty natural progression. And then we've got the crash. So what I'm focusing on here is that sign-in click. I don't think our tests were actually using a signed-in device, because that can be a bit of a pain. So I bet that probably is where our crash is coming from.
So what do we do next, right? We'd love to push out a fix to our bug and roll out an update to our app, but that would take too long, and our users will miss Santa if we go that route. So what are our options for damage control? Well, let's think about our app a little bit. This year, we're adding the Penguin Swim game. And what we're worried about is what happens if Penguin Swim gets a bug, or 2, or 3. If Penguin Swim will be super popular, it means that if it breaks, users might have a bad opinion of our app as a whole. But some games, like Memory Match, have been in our code base for years. We know that they're stable, and we know that these games are super fun. So if we have a problem in Penguin Swim, users should just go play Memory Match or some other game. What if we could box off that crashing game and hide it until it starts to behave better? If users never played Penguin Swim, they wouldn't have anything to say bad about our app because they have all the other games to play. By the way, even if your app isn't a collection of games like Santa Tracker, you can still design your app in a modular way so that new features that you add don't cause regressions in your existing code base. If we do things right, some bad code in our latest release shouldn't cause problems for the rest of their app. All right. So we're going to need to be able to stop crashes quickly and notice them and do whatever we can to put our app in a working state. At Google, we call this Rollback First, which is putting our app in the last known stable state before we ever start trying to fix the bug. Now, a lot of engineers have an instinct to fix forward instead of roll back. This means as soon as there's a bug, go and try and fix it and push that fix out to users. But as many of you may know from bad experiences, when you try and fix bugs on a short time scale, you end up introducing new bugs, and then the whole process repeats itself, right? So to make changes in our app without pushing an app update, we used Firebase Remote Config. With Firebase Remote Config, we can change the behavior and appearance of our app on the fly right from the Firebase console. Not only will we be warned of errors when they happen with crash reporting, and be able to diagnose why they happened with analytics, we'll be able to fix them in just a matter of minutes. Let's dive into some code for remote config. So don't get intimidated, but this is the way that we're going to fetch a parameter with Firebase remote config. It's actually pretty simple. First, we just get our singleton instance of the Firebase remote config object. We'll call that config. Then we'll call fetch on the config object and passing in an expiration value. This expiration value will tell us when to hit the cache and when to make a request to Firebase. This makes sure that your user's device doesn't get hit with drained battery life or a high network bill. When that request comes back successfully, we activate the latest values, and then the config object has all the new values in it. For Santa Tracker, all we need to do is call getBoolean with the enable game string, and we'll get an enable game Boolean that we can use in our app to hide or show Penguin Swim when it's broken. So with just that amount of code, let's head to the console. Hope you're not tired of this GIF. And we're going to turn off the Penguin Swim game with just a few clicks. Our users will have the updated version of the app in just a few minutes. All we need to do is go to the remote config section of the Firebase console and find our enable swimming game parameter and set it from true to false. Then we just click Update, and our users will start getting this app update, or this little modification, in just a few minutes. A lot faster than 8 days.
All right, so Dan's turned off Penguin Swim, and the app is back to a healthy state because the crashing game has totally disappeared. But if you think about it, this is not really the best user experience that we could offer. And the reason it's not the best is because we've disabled the game for every single user. Everybody's getting enable swimming game is false. But only a small subset of our users ever had the crash to begin with. So now we've just taken probably the best game away from a bunch of people who could have played it. And if every game has a small number of crashing users, now we're going to have to turn all of the games off, which would leave the app empty, and that's not going to work. So what we really need is to target these changes. We need to only turn the game off for users who have experienced the crash or are likely to experience the crash in the future. When you target changes like this, you're going to give each user the most complete experience that they can have based on their own conditions, which is really powerful. So let's think of a few ways you might want to target this. Maybe we have no idea what's going on. We want to run a 60-40 split and see if our crash rate goes down by the appropriate amount, just to see if we're headed down the right path. Or maybe we want to target it by country. So if we think it has something to do with being in France, we'll turn it off for French users, and everybody else can keep playing the Penguin Swim game. Or what if we think it has something to do with language? If anybody's ever developed a localized app, you might know that German strings are very long, and it might be overflowing our layout. That could be causing the crash. Turn the game off for users with German devices, leave it on for everybody else. Or what if we think it has something to do with API level, which it often does? Let's turn the game off for Jelly Bean devices and leave it on for everybody else. So all of that is built into remote config by default. Let's go back to the console and see how this works. I'm going to create a simple condition to turn the game off for users in Antarctica. I mean, they already have plenty of penguins in Antarctica anyway, so they probably don't need the Penguin Swim game. This should be a safe change. So you can see I'm defining a new condition. I can give it any name and color I want. That's for me. And in the applies section, I say this applies if the device region or country is Antarctica. And device region and country is automatically detected by Firebase in this situation. You don't have to do anything. Once I've created the condition, I can add it to the parameter that Dan defined before. So this is enable swimming game. This controls whether users see the game or not. Now if you match the is in Antarctica condition, it's false. It's true for everybody else. Once I've saved that, we can see that our config is no longer a list of static values. There are some branching conditions. You could add many conditions to a single parameter, and if a user doesn't match any of them, they always fall back to the default. So, OK, we can target by country, but I don't think that's the problem with my game. I have some ideas that are specific to the way I built the app that I think might be affecting it. For one thing, I know I didn't have great test coverage on phablet devices with large screens. So maybe I want to do it by screen size. Or maybe somebody just released a new connected toaster on Kickstarter running Android, and it's just crashing every single time the user loads it on that device. Or what if it's signed-in state, like I guessed before? Maybe I want to turn the game on for signed-out users and off for signed-in users. Or maybe I just want to turn the game off for Dan, because I don't like Dan.
Hey, come on.
So now we're going to write some code, because we need customization on how we're targeting. And what we're going to do here is use user properties of Google Analytics. So the way user properties work are kind of like headers, where our events are things that happen at a single point in time. User properties get attached to every event after you set them. So I'm just going to set a few basic ones here. I'll set the device board, which would be Galaxy S8 or Pixel, device brand, Google or Samsung, and goat user to check if the user is a goat. And that is a real call in the Android SDK. I did not make that up. And now that we've set a bunch of user properties in the app, we're going to go back to the console and make some changes to our configuration based on these custom properties that we just made up. So now we're going to be delivering values over the air based on properties set in our app without any servers or really any configuration at all. So this is the screen where I define a new condition. Last time I was here, I was doing is in Antarctica. But now I'm going to do a condition for is on Pixel. And I want to turn the game off for people using a Google Pixel or a Google Pixel XL. So how am I going to match those users? Well, I want to know if the device board, the property I defined, contains Pixel. That should cover Pixel and Pixel XL. And if the device brand matches Google exactly. So here you can see that you can chain operations on strings and number comparisons and create really advanced conditions without having to just fall back on the default that Firebase provides. And now that we've learned all this about config, we know what to do when there's a problem in our app. First thing we're going to do is roll back and box off the app. But we're going to do this only for users that have conditions that we think might cause the crash. So by disabling Penguin Swim, in this case, only for the users who have the crash, everybody else can still play. We're giving the best experience to all of our users by using Firebase. And now we've got the reviews we wanted, all 5-star reviews. People are saying, I love you, or this is the best game ever, or the greatest game in the entire world. These reviews I agree with.
So this is great. In our next release, we can just relax. Crash comes in, stay calm, and address it in the Firebase console. So we used Firebase to make a crashing app stable, but can we use Firebase to make a good app great? Of course we can. We can use remote config and analytics to fine-tune our app and improve it for users in between updates. Here's a helpful workflow to think about this process. First, we'll use Google Analytics for Firebase and try and identify an area of improvement for our app. Next, we'll use remote config to make a change to improve that experience for those users. Here's what I mean. To better understand our user behavior, we'll use Analytics Stream View, which gives us a real-time view of the events being logged from our users' devices. It's a great way to get an intuitive understanding of what's happening in your app, as opposed to running a bunch of BigQuery scripts and doing a formal analysis. You can do it right on the fly. Then we'll use remote config to send those improvements. But before we get into remote config, it's important to note that remote config requires some advanced planning. You can't just change anything about your app at any time. We're not there yet. But what you have to do, for example, would be replace magic numbers with calls to Firebase remote config. Every app has some amount of magic number, magic hard-coded string that makes our app work. And here we have an ice cube density value that we're setting to 0.97 because that was the best value in testing. But we don't actually know if that ice cube density is going to be the best thing in production. So we can set it to a Firebase remote config call and be able to change that on the fly. We can change it over the air and not worry if we chose the right magic number back in testing. So let's look at our dashboard. Penguin Swim is running fine, but half our users are dying before they score a single point. You can see that 0 is up at 48%. This game is much harder than we thought, and we need to do something about that. Well, just by adding that call to remote config, we can lower the ice cube density parameter right from the console. We'll set it to 0.8 for a random subset of our users and leave the default at 1.0. We can change this value without spinning up a whole new APK, which is how we would have had to test this hypothesis without remote config. If we're successful here, we should see that score distribution smooth out in Stream View. This is great, and our game is crash-free, but now let's say we get a ton of usage in the US and sort of lackluster interest in Canada. I thought they'd love penguins, but we were wrong. So let's deliver them a custom experience. Maybe change the colors, red and white, add a few maple leaves. Maybe they'll like that. After defining a few key UI parameters with remote config in our app, we can iterate on design in real time over the air with remote config. Hopefully our Canadian users will like this new design, and if not, we'll roll it back. Let's head back to the dashboard. Now, we've set ourselves up for success, but inevitably something always goes wrong. In this case, we've lost contact with Santa's sleigh. We're getting a bunch of 500 errors in our app. Well, we can do more than just fiddle with the way our app looks with remote config. We can also use it to react to unexpected events like this. So while Sam works on a fix, to fix the 500 error, I could use remote config to send a friendly error message to our users. Santa's fueling up his sleigh, be right back, is much more easy to understand and much more friendly than server error, try again, or something along those lines. And we couldn't have hard-coded that error message into our app because we didn't know what was going to go wrong ahead of time.
So we did it, right? the app's a slam dunk. It's not crashing. Our users can play all the games. And we've made the app even better over time using Firebase. So let's compare where we are now to where we were in the nightmare scenario. This is the same timeline we showed before. We shipped the app on December 1st. We have a crash on December 18th. But now we identify the crash and fix it on the same day using Firebase crash reporting, Google Analytics, and Firebase remote config. So now, when December 24th comes around and Santa's ready to fly, our users will all have a really smooth experience. If you've been following along, and I hope you have, this should make you feel really powerful. Firebase is your command center. You can sit behind the computer and have a Minority Report interface over what your app users are doing and give them the best experience over the air. You never have to deploy an app update if you have foresight and you use Firebase. And best of all, everything we showed you can be set up in just a few lines of code that we showed, and it's all completely free. So if you don't believe me, Santa Tracker is entirely open source. Go check out the code. Maybe you just want to get some cool PNGs of penguins, and that's fine too. But you can also see how to use Firebase in a real app. It's on github.com/Google Santa Tracker Android.
Awesome. Thank you all for listening to how we use Firebase and Santa Tracker. If you have questions for Samurai, we're going to be out these doors to the left in the Firebase sandbox area as soon as we're done here. And remember, there are lots of fun Firebase talks that are happening here right on this stage, stage 7, live stream 7 today. At 10:30, we'll have the Fabric and Firebase teams both on stage to talk about how we're bringing the best of these platforms together. And at 1:30, we'll talk about pirate metrics to grow your user base. Then at 4:30, we'll dive into the details on app performance, the new feature we just launched today. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you all for
Enjoy
coming.
the rest of day 2.